So, as all good epic heroes do, Neo faces a life-changing choice in the blockbuster hit The Matrix, the movie that was out a number of years ago now. He faces a life-altering choice in that movie, and it all hangs in the balance early on in the show. At a critical moment, the older and wiser Morpheus tells Neo that he can do one of two things: swallow a blue pill and continue to believe whatever he wants and to continue living life as is, or he can choose to swallow a red pill, and by doing so, come to see and know the truth and the depth of things as they really are. Neo chooses the red pill, and as he swallows it, he finds himself thrown into the darkness of a gut-wrenching and excruciating journey of physical and mental transformation. He wakes up sometime later, bruised, spent, broken, and exhausted, and asks, "What's happening to me? Why do my eyes hurt? Why do they hurt?" And Morpheus explains and replies, "Neo, you've never used them before. Rest. The answers are coming." As we listen in on Mark's story of Jesus, we find that Jesus and his disciples are on the road yet again. They spend a lot of time traveling in the Gospel of Mark, and this time they're on their way to Jerusalem. For a short 9 chapters, Jesus has fed, healed, questioned, taught, and preached his way through the backwater towns of Galilee, taking with him this ragtag bunch of fisher folk, intriguing all of the cast-offs and the rejects and the nobodies with his good news that they are hearing, perhaps for the first time. And he's generally wreaking havoc with, or at least making very nervous, the established traditions and religious norms of the day. He has turned one of those proverbial corners in his life, and as the word tells us, he has set his face to go to Jerusalem, where he will face the music that has been playing in the background of his ministry all along. He's not there yet, but he will soon head into those final days and weeks of his life and ministry, where everything that he's been trying to tell us will come true. So the pulse of Mark's story has quickened, and we can smell and taste the urgency that is in the air as Jesus and the disciples reach Jericho, that last 10-mile stretch of highways and byways before they reach the big city of Jerusalem. And as always, the beggars and the outcasts and the folks who were not welcome in the city for whatever reason lined the road and took up residence in the ditches and the byways, under the overpasses and at the stoplights along the way. They knew the road was well traveled and that people might just have a little something to be able to give them that would tide them over until the next good thing came along. So they spread out their cloaks and they pulled out their cardboard signs and they waited, hoping to gather a few coins from someone else's spare change. Bartimaeus was there on that day, and the story tells us that he was blind and that he too was a beggar. Mark doesn't tell us a lot about him, except that his father was named Timaeus. Maybe he had moved his pallet from his usual out of the way spot to be closer to the road. Maybe he was wedged out of the way and dwarfed by the layers of the crowds. Maybe he just happened to be in the right place at the right time. We don't know what brought him there. But as soon as the word trickled through the crowds that Jesus of Nazareth was near and passing through, his ears perked up and his heart leapt up into his throat. And like someone playing pin the tail on the donkey, or like a child taking a swing or a chop at an elusive piñata, old Bart called out to Jesus. I mean, what did he have to lose? Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. It's not too hard to imagine how Bartimaeus might have been peppered with an assortment of tin cups or rocks, or pelted by old apple cores or a stray rotten tomato or two, as the people around him tried to tell him to shut up, to stop being such a loudmouth, that Jesus didn't have time for all of those shenanigans or requests. But you would think that they would have learned by now that that's not how Jesus worked. And that it was certainly not how he dealt with people who reached out to him and called his name. Jesus stopped and stood still, as Mark says, and Bartimaeus cries out again. And with Jesus then, with what had to have been an ancient well of patience, tells the people around him, call him over here, call him here. And as the blind beggar stumbled forward toward Jesus, the question was already in the air. What do you want me to do for you, Bartimaeus? And his answer was simple. My teacher, let me see again. And those holy words were spoken as they had been for so many people, and his eyes opened, and the white noonday light shone in as he heard the words that heaven most wants earth to hear. Go, your faith has made you well. Now, this stands in sharp contrast to the conversation that had just happened a few verses earlier, the part of the story that wasn't here today, but the one that we read last week. The disciples, namely James and John, are playing the who's the favorite game and arguing power plays right there under Jesus's nose. Things had been going well, I guess, and they were feeling their oats, and they wanted to make sure that they got a piece of the pie, working so close to the head guy, and all that. So Jesus turns and asks them, what do you want me to do for you? As it turns out, they want a reserved seat in heaven and a guaranteed pass to the inner circle, all the while making claims about their faith that will be impossible to back up, much less live out. As they had come to know, their mouth was writing checks that they weren't going to be able to cash later on. It's power and prestige that you want to sit at my right hand? Jesus says, sorry, no can do. You guys just don't get it. And here we are, almost at the end of the story. We're running out of time. Don't you remember? Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and those who want to be first must be last. So you can imagine the shock and the dismay that James and John and all the boys felt when Jesus stops in the road, stands still, and asks the same question to a no-count beggar, and then gives him exactly what he wants and needs. What do you want me to do for you? Master, simply let me see again. Jesus can't grant the disciples' request because it's based on delusions of grandiosity. But Jesus can welcome Bartimaeus because the beggar knows that he is blind. He knows he can't see. He's willing to make a decisive break with the system, and he is willing to risk everything. Let me see again, he says. In the Gospel of Mark, I'm sorry to say that Jesus is not always the answer, contrary to some bumper sticker theologies. Jesus is the question to the disciples, to Bartimaeus, and to us. What do you want me to do for you, gentle reader? We may be tempted to say, great, Jesus, I'm finally glad you asked. It's about time you asked me what you could do for me. I'd like to get a new house, maybe a better car, keep me and my family safe from harm, let me have some job security. I don't need to be rich, but I'd like to live comfortably, and I'd like to not have to worry about all those extraneous things in life. You know, if you could kind of protect what little investment portfolio I do have and maybe like pave the way to retirement. You know, I'd like my job, but I'd really kind of like to move up in the world. All those kinds of questions. But Jesus's question is not of the Microsoft variety. It's not, where do you want to go today? And how do you want to advance? It's a question to which we can and should respond, Master, let me see again. And the scales will fall from the eyes of our heart, for there are people and situations that we look at every day and we never really see as the world rushes by us, you know? The old person in the grocery store aisle who's struggling to either reach a product or make what should be a simple decision, but that is difficult for them. Maybe it's the person sitting next to you in the car in traffic, the one who cleans your office, the one who picks up your trash, the one who serves your food when you go out to eat, or the person at H-E-B that rings up your groceries. The people that pass by us on the street, who are they? Do we really see them? What's their story? What's their name? And more close to home, look at your kids, your parents, your neighbors, the world around you, and see them. Really see them for all that they are and for all that they're not. Where the dents are in their lives, what makes them tick, what makes them laugh and cry, and why. And that person that when you stand in front of the mirror, that person that's looking back at you, just who is that? Stop and listen and gather up your mat. Open your eyes and look. Strive to see. And it's not just an individual question for us, because if we listen closely, we can hear Jesus as we walk along the road as a community of faith, as a church. What do you want me to do for you, beloved church? Now that's some fertile ground if you ask me, especially in these days of, are we in a pandemic still or are we not? And we have to plan, and what's our budget going to be, and what are we going to do, and how do we live into the future, and all of that. When we spend time dreaming dreams and trying to catch a vision for the future, who's going to discern leadership roles in our church, and all of that stuff that is such a positive. And then we say, what was that, Jesus? And he's like, what do you want me to do for you, beloved church? And we're like, we've got the divine ear. Let's get our list out, because boy, howdy, Jesus, do we have a list for you. We'd like maybe we'd like this camera to work that we got going on here, which we're trying really hard, right? But Jesus, if you could just kind of do that, that would be great. We want to be able to reach out to our community and do all of these things. And so we'd really just like you to make that happen. We would like it if our air conditioner wouldn't stop leaking all over the place. That would be helpful. Jesus, if you could like take care of that, right? All of those things that are human, that when we have the divine ear, it would sure be great if Jesus would respond. And like, oh yeah, like we need some more kids, and we'd love to go back to multicultural youth conference and all of those things. And I know that if we pass out a pen and paper, we could probably all start making some lists, because there are plenty of us who can do that. It's easy to get carried away when we start thinking about that. But the answer comes back to us. Okay, James and John, I thought what I said was clear. But what would it mean for us to stop and to hold off on those questions and to stand still for just a second and say, good teacher, we want you to help us see again, and we want to follow you along the way. That puts all that other stuff in a different light. That's not to say that all those things aren't important, because they are. It just puts them in a different light and in a different perspective. One where the tail isn't wagging the dog, if you know what I mean. Several years ago at a presbytery meeting, there was somebody who was being examined for ordination, which is one of the things that the presbytery does when we gather. And this person said something that has always stuck with me. And they get questions sometimes from the floor, because that's the presbytery's right and responsibility to do, to ask these people who are getting ready to be ordained to reflect on matters of theology and worship and the life of the church. And this person said, when someone asked them about the mission of the church, he said, the church, the community of Christ, is called to be in struggle with other people, to listen to and to hear them, and to have its heart broken. And as I pondered that thought, and it stuck with me all these years, I thought it might not be a bad thing to have our eyes hurt for a little while either. Because it might just be the first time in a long time that we've actually used them. As I mentioned before, Jesus is making his way through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. And as he questions and calls his disciples and us through the words of Mark, he does so quite clearly, because he calls us to solidarity with him and the human family in the dark night of suffering. He calls us to live in our world and in history with open eyes, to look deep into events beyond the conflicting claims that vie for power, to search for and attack the very roots of violence and oppression that hold the human story hostage. And he calls us to historical insomnia, if you will, to dream awake, to keep watch asleep, to live while dying, and to know ourselves already resurrected with open eyes. Open your eyes, Bartimaeus. Pick up your cloak and go, for your faith has made you well. Stand toe to toe and nose to nose with the destructive forces of the world and in your community. Be a prophetic voice that speaks when others are silent. Stand up when others want to stay seated on their hands. Be a place of genuine welcome and hospitality where people can bring all of their wonderful hopes and their broken dreams. Allow people to tell the truth to one another, to be who they truly are. Ask the hard and difficult questions. Faithfully worship the God who created us and redeemed us. And as best we can, give one another a glimpse of the good news of the kingdom of God and point to it, even if your hand has to tremble and your voice shakes. Be the church, and the rest will follow. Open your eyes. Can you see? Why do your eyes hurt all the way down to your heart and soul? Well, maybe it's because it's been a while since we've used them. We hear the voice of Jesus. What do you want me to do for you? And my hunch is that if we respond to that question as Bartimaeus did, Those other things that we worry about are going to take care of themselves. What do you want me to do for you, beloved church? Good teacher, open the eyes of our hearts. Give us vision and help us to see. May it be so, friends, for us today and the rest of the seasons of our lives. Amen.